Iran's threatening to hit back at the US and its allies over the killing of General Qasem Soleimani, the leader of its elite Quds Force. That's spooking investors in the region and driving away international travellers. And it could also take a toll on the economies in the Gulf.
The stock market has been affected, especially petchem sector. Aramco is a global supplier. 10% of the global supply come from Aramco. And what hurt Aramco hurt the global economy.
We are very keen that the situation in the region doesn't escalate any further. It's certainly a very dangerous moment, and we have to be conscious of the risks and dangers, not just to the region, but to wider global security. And therefore, we hope that all actors take all the steps necessary to prevent any further escalation.
And for more on this, Middle Eastern political specialist Taufiq Rahim joins us live now from Dubai. Welcome to Money Talks, Taufiq. Now, firstly, explain to us what the current state of the economies of Saudi Arabia and the UAE are like.
Well, I think the economies in the Gulf are in a precarious situation simply because of the cyclical nature of the economies here. They're trying to diversify their economy, and you've had obviously volatility in oil prices, and that's meant that they're subject to kind of the vicissitudes of any global economic slowdown. So that was affecting already, I think, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi, and any type of kind of shock event could have a precipitous set of consequences here. I have to say, though, until this point, while there is obviously fear of what could come next, there hasn't been a sharp reduction in economic activity or travel to the UAE or Saudi, and people are cautiously operating as business as usual.
And explain to us also, why are the economies of Saudi Arabia and the UAE so susceptible to a rise in tensions between the US and Iran? What's the relationship there?
Well, of course, I mean, I think in the case of the United Arab Emirates, you have an economy that has a large focus on tourism, travel, especially the non-oil economy, and logistics. And so any aspect of threat to transportation or trade flows would have a sharp effect on the UAE. And then I think both Saudi and the UAE depend on their oil resources and oil exports, and any type of damage to that infrastructure would have a sharp effect on the economy. And then in the long term, investor confidence is based on stability, right? And I think the UAE is one of the most stable countries in a very unstable region, and so that's where a sharp rise in tensions, and of course not just tensions, but then actions back and forth between Iran and the United States could affect that, especially if there's anything that takes place in the Gulf as a theater of activity.
Now, in the wake of the assassination of that top Iranian general, the cost of insuring against a Saudi Arabian bond default spiked. How closely linked are Saudi Arabia's fortunes to what happens in Iran?
I don't know if its fortunes are tied to what happens in Iran, but if Iran undertakes any type of actions like they did in September, but with greater intensity, on facilities in Saudi, or there's instability in Saudi, then this would have a significant effect. But one would have to look at the events in September, which were cataclysmic in some senses, and Saudi Arabia was able to absorb that. And that is a sign that they could absorb potentially a low level of activity. But if there is a severe escalation, they will be in the line of fire, so to speak. And so that's why there's a lot of caution, as well as proactive efforts on the parts of Gulf countries and public statements to try and ratchet down tensions and call for de-escalation.
Now, the events in September that you referred to was the drone and cruise missile attack on Aramco oil facilities. Now, that had a huge impact on oil prices at the time as well. And it also prompted Fitch to downgrade the kingdom's long-term foreign currency issuer default rating from A+ to A. So we saw an immediate negative effect on Saudi Arabia there. Do you expect Saudi Arabia to suffer more in the long term as things perhaps destabilize in the wider region?
I really think it depends. I think you could see the opposite take place if there is any sense of overcoming this current period. I think you have a Saudi Arabia that understands the economic fragility that can occur due to instability, and it's been taking efforts to actually de-escalate the situation in Yemen and been hosting peace talks. So I think there's a greater realization in Saudi Arabia to focus on its domestic economy, and that's why any shock from escalation would have that effect.
Yes.
Obviously, you pointed out, the debt rating, the credit default swaps. Because the majority of Saudi's economy is still linked to oil and oil exports, any threat to that effectively challenges the sovereign credit rating of Saudi. So the one thing that needs to be guaranteed are uninhibited oil flows, and that means that the government has revenue, it can meet its obligations, and people have confidence in its long-term debt.
Okay, Taufiq Rahim, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your analysis.